Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open something chilly, literally. No modern fridges, no air conditioning, and definitely no freezers humming in the background. Yet somehow, people in the 1800s managed to keep ice cream solid in the middle of summer, transport frozen blocks across the ocean, and serve chilled wine at sweltering dinner parties. You won't believe this, but there was a time when ice was more expensive than tea in some parts of the world. Alright, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And if you're listening from somewhere warm tonight, tell us your location and local time in the comments. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You step out onto a frozen lake in New England just as the sky starts shifting from steel grey to that thin, pinkish glow of dawn. It's the early 1840s, and winter has turned the landscape into a sheet of ice thick enough to hold a wagon. The cold bites through your boots. Your breath steams in the air, and all around you, the muffled crunch of boots on snow and the rhythmic rasp of saws slicing through frozen water fill the morning. The men here don't talk much. They work in pairs. One scores lines into the ice with a special chisel. The other follows, sawing straight through with a long-toothed blade that looks more at home in a lumber mill. Each block is roughly 22 inches by 32 inches and weighs over 200 pounds, and yet they make it look easy, sliding the blocks into narrow channels cut into the surface, where the ice floats gently downstream, guided by poles and ropes, toward a loading dock. No machines, no motors, just muscle, coordination, and cold. The smell of sawdust is oddly sharp on the breeze. It's not from trees, but from piles of dried pine shavings nearby. The moment a block of ice is pulled from the water, it's dusted and packed with the stuff. Sawdust, it turns out, is the secret weapon of the ice trade. It insulates. It prevents melting. It keeps the blocks from fusing together in transit. And it gets everywhere. Into boots, into noses, and sometimes into the tea of the men sipping breakfast by the fire. You wipe your brow with a wool sleeve. Even in the dead of winter, this work makes you sweat. There's something almost hypnotic about the process. Score, saw, lever, slide, dust, stack. All day long. One of the men leans over to you and mutters something about a shipment last year that was delayed 2 days on the road to Boston. The entire load? Gone. Melted. Just a puddle in a wooden box. He chuckles, but it's a bitter sound. Every block here is money, literal frozen capital. As the sun rises higher, the frozen plain glows faintly blue. You glance toward the horizon where a line of horse-drawn wagons waits in the distance, ready to carry today's harvest. It's a logistical ballet. Everything timed to the hour. Everything gambled against the slow, inevitable enemy. Warmth. You overhear two men joking about how they once buried a few extra blocks behind a barn to use in July. They claim they uncovered them 4 months later and found them still mostly solid, cold enough to chill a bottle of cider. Was it true? Maybe. Or maybe it was one of those stories icemen tell to keep their spirits up in 10-degree weather. One thing is certain, though. This isn't just about ice. It's about control. Over heat, over time, over distance. And in this era, that control is worth its weight in gold. Or maybe more. You follow the procession as a wagon creaks forward, pulled by 2 thick-coated horses whose breath puffs like smoke in the frigid morning. The blocks of ice, wrapped in canvas and dusted with pine shavings, are stacked with precision, like bricks made of crystal. A young boy, maybe 12, walks alongside, shooing away curious crows with a broomstick. One wrong move, one unbalanced load, and the whole stack might tumble into a heap of glittering ruin. The road out of the harvesting site is narrow and treacherous, winding through snow-draped woods and over icy ruts. You grip the side of the wagon and try not to slip as the wheel thuds into a hidden hole. The driver just grunts. He's done this route 100 times, and every time it's a race against the sun. By noon, the sky has turned that painful shade of white that only winter can paint. Bright enough to squint, but still bone-deep cold, As the wagon reaches the edge of a larger road, you catch sight of a cluster of wooden buildings in the distance, the ice house. It looks like a barn from the outside, modest, unremarkable. But step inside and you're struck by the sudden silence, like you've walked into a cave. The walls are lined with thick wooden slats, and the air smells of earth, sawdust, and cold decay. A few dim shafts of light pierce the darkness, catching particles of dust floating lazily in the still air. This is where the real magic happens. Each block is slid carefully into place beside the last. Men move slowly, methodically, as if stacking a giant puzzle made of glass. Between the layers, more sawdust is packed in thick, sometimes a foot deep. It acts like insulation, but also like padding. If two blocks touch directly, they'll fuse, and once they fuse, they're done. Useless. One man mutters about a shipment ruined last year because someone forgot the dusting layer. 1,000 pounds of ice fused into one unmovable cube. They had to break it apart with picks and torches. Outside, fresh wagons arrive and the unloading begins again. You watch a small group peel away and head toward the shed behind the main structure. They're taking broken chunks, too small for storage, too jagged for shipment, and setting them aside for use by local shops. Some of it will chill milk, some will preserve meat in a butcher's basement, and some will end up in tin-lined boxes in wealthy kitchens, sitting silently beside jars of jelly and rounds of cheese. The work goes on into the afternoon, even as your fingers stiffen and your nose runs. No one complains. They know that this window of time, this narrow, brutal stretch of winter, is their whole year's profit. 1 week too warm, one delay in the river thaw, one bad batch of sawdust, and everything melts, figuratively and literally. As the sun dips behind the trees, you glance once more at the wall of stacked ice blocks now rising along the far wall. There's something ancient about it, like a treasure hoarded by nature, only now carefully captured by men. You can't help but think, one block of this very ice might be floating in a glass of lemonade in Havana 6 months from now, and the person sipping it will never know it came from this very lake, lifted by hand, wrapped in sawdust and shipped across the world, inch by inch, before it melted into memory. The ice might be silent, but the business behind it roars louder than a factory bell. You don't realise it until you're sitting in the back of a smoky Boston office, sipping tea that tastes faintly of tin, and listening to two men argue over shipping rates. The man on the left, wiry and red-cheeked, jabs at a ledger with a stubby pencil. "You want to pay $6 per ton to Charleston," he snaps, "but my cutters are working 16-hour days in sub-zero, and sawdust ain't free." The man opposite, dressed in a neatly tailored coat and gloves he refuses to remove, simply smirks. He's not here for the weather, he's here for the margins. You're in the heart of the ice trade's business war now, far from the lakes and wagons. It's the 1850s, and this is one of Boston's strangest empires. While cotton, tobacco and coal dominate southern ports, it's frozen water that's turning northern merchants into millionaires, and none more so than Frederick Tudor, the Ice King. You hear his name spoken with a mix of awe and irritation. He didn't invent the trade, but he made it global. In the early 1800s, Tudor sent ice from New England all the way to the Caribbean and India. Everyone laughed, until the ships arrived with enough ice still intact to chill the governor's punch bowl in Calcutta. After that, laughter turned to envy. You pass by a wall map, pins driven into exotic ports: Havana, Rio, Manila, Madras. Each route is a gamble, a game of temperature, timing and trust. The ice must be harvested in the deepest cold, packed properly, shipped quickly, and, most of all, unloaded before it liquefies into worthless puddles in a wooden hull. Back at the desk, the two men have stopped arguing. They've agreed on a figure. The red-cheeked one signs with a flourish and shoves the contract into a drawer. You notice he does it with a gloved hand. Frostbite's a common souvenir in this industry. Later, you find yourself in a pub near the harbour. Two dockhands are playing cards with fingers still stained from ash and pine. They speak in low tones about which company is paying better this season. You overhear the name Wenham Lake whispered, like it's a brand of fine wine, And indeed, Wenham ice was once so prized in London that it was advertised by name in upscale grocers, cleaner, clearer, and slower to melt. As the fire crackles, one of the dockhands leans toward you and mentions a strange incident. Two rival companies accused each other of swapping dusted ice for waterlogged blocks. Apparently one crew sent a shipment packed with damp straw instead of proper sawdust. The result? Melted disaster. But no one proved anything, and the ice wars moved on to the next skirmish. And so it goes. The ice trade isn't just chisels and carts, it's handshakes, gossip, dirty tricks, and bookkeeping. It's a game where 1 degree literally can mean the difference between fortune and loss. You step outside, breath frosting in the air, and realise, in this cold empire, it's not the ice that's cutthroat, it's the men behind it. You trail one of the clerks from the office to the warehouse near the harbour, just in time to catch a shipment coming in from up north. The building is long and low, with thick wooden walls and almost no windows. Inside, the air smells faintly sour, a strange blend of salt, wood rot, and damp pine. A team of workers moves quickly, forming a line from cart to platform, passing ice blocks hand to hand. Each block is wrapped in burlap, the sawdust falling from the seams like golden snow. The foreman barks at a boy to stop dragging a block. It scuffs too much off the corners. Apparently the shape matters. Perfect rectangles stack tighter, melt slower, and sell better. Imperfect ones, marked down, or worse, rejected entirely. You notice a strange tension in the room. Not panic, but urgency. These men know something you don't. The market is shifting. Just last month, a new trader arrived from Baltimore with a faster route. Word is he's undercutting prices by storing ice farther south in makeshift cellars. Not quite as cold, but just cold enough for quick delivery. Competition is everywhere now. And not just between cities or companies, but even within neighbourhoods. You hear one man mutter about a tavern down the road offering chilled lager in spring. That used to be a luxury only in midsummer. Now it's a gimmick. The public's taste for cold has grown faster than supply. You walk past a chalkboard tallying sales. It's not in dollars, but in blocks. One order, 350 blocks to a fishmonger. Another, 120 blocks to a hotel. Each sale a silent agreement. This much ice, this long stored, this carefully handled. No guarantees. If it arrives half melted, the client blames the seller. If it arrives late, they blame the cutter. And if it arrives perfect, nobody says a word. A barrel tips over nearby and a pile of wet sawdust spills across the floor. One worker curses under his breath, not for the mess, but for the waste. Good sawdust is getting expensive. Not all sawdust is equal after all. Pine is preferred, especially old growth, dry and powdery. Elm smells too strong. Oak moulds. And heaven forbid someone uses damp wood chips. It turns to paste and ruins everything. You pass a back room where two men are weighing blocks on an iron scale. Each one is tagged and entered into a logbook. There's a whole system for this. Grades, weights, roots. You'd think it was cheese or silk the way they fuss over it. As the afternoon shadows stretch, a delivery cart rolls in, its wheels crusted with slush. The driver hops down and hands the clerk a tiny folded slip of paper. A new order from a private residence in Beacon Hill, 20 blocks for a wedding banquet. You glance out the door toward the icy street and imagine it. Footmen carrying blocks up marble steps, servants chipping slivers into silver bowls, guests sipping cold punch in satin gloves. And none of them, none, would give a second thought to where that ice came from. To the men in wet boots, to the boy stacking burlap, to the pine dust in the clerk's cuffs. The warehouse quiets as the sun dips low. The temperature inside feels unchanged, but in this trade, every tick of the clock counts. Every day warmer than expected is a risk, every shortcut, a gamble, every block, a bet against time, and right now, the house is still winning. You leave the dockside behind and follow the ice. Not as a merchant, not as a clerk, but as a block itself rattling along in the belly of a wagon toward the next leg of its journey. The horses trot steadily, hooves clapping on packed snow as the city recedes into winter mist. You're heading inland toward one of the main arteries of this frigid enterprise, the ice road. It's not a single road, really. It's a sprawling seasonal network, paths carved across frozen rivers, snowy woods, and compacted trails that only exist for a few short weeks each year. In this fleeting window, it becomes a bustling highway of cold commerce, where wagons creak under the weight of stacked ice, and drivers pray for more snow, not sun. Your wagon joins a caravan of others, each spaced carefully to avoid overloading the trail. The ice must move fast, but not too fast. Speed causes friction. Friction causes heat, and heat is the enemy of everything here. So they glide, not gallop. You pass a team of men spreading fresh straw over a patch of road. Beneath it, a dark spot glistens, ice thinning from underneath. The river is melting. It always starts invisibly from below. 1 minute the path is firm. The next, a cart vanishes with a groan, taking horses, men and cargo into freezing water. It's happened before, too often. No one talks about it directly, but you see it in their eyes, especially when crossing bridges made of nothing but ice itself, creaking under iron wheels. The wagon rocks sharply as it hits a rut. You reach out to steady yourself and accidentally brush the edge of a block. It burns your palm in reverse, cold so deep it stings like fire. No one uses gloves thick enough to insulate completely. They make it too hard to grip the ropes and wooden runners. So the men here have hands like bark, scarred and pale from years of frost contact. By mid-morning the sun breaks through and you see trouble ahead. A team of wagons has stopped. One axle has snapped, the cart listing sideways. A few blocks of ice have tumbled off into a snowbank half buried in pine dust. 2 drivers are arguing, not angrily, just tiredly. They know this will cost them time, and time is always melting. You walk ahead to see the road curve along a bluff above a frozen lake. Down below you spot a different scene altogether. A sleigh glides silently across the ice pulled by a lean black horse. In the back, 2 gentlemen in top hats, bundled in fur, sipping something steaming from silver flasks. You imagine them laughing at the rustic labour above, unaware that the very ice beneath them may have been carved from the same lake just weeks earlier. Back on the trail, the caravan moves again. You notice the drivers using long metal hooks to adjust the load. Tools that look brutal but are handled with surprising gentleness. A man nudges a block back into alignment, checking that it sits square so it doesn't rub against its neighbour and create a warm spot. It's like tending a sleeping beast, quiet, careful, and full of respect. The irony isn't lost on you. Everyone's working so hard just to keep something exactly the same, to keep it frozen, unmoving, unchanging. All while the world, sunlight, weather, accidents, does everything it can to undo that work. And still, they press on. The caravan finally rolls into a depot by late afternoon, a cluster of low buildings huddled near the bend of a railway line. You hop down from the wagon and feel the ache in your knees from hours of rattling along uneven tracks. Around you, men are already unloading. The rhythm of the road shifts now, from motion to management. This is where ice changes hands, changes ownership, and most importantly, changes form of transport. You step into a long, low structure built partly underground. The floor is stone, damp and cold underfoot. Inside, the air feels heavier. The temperature here is controlled by design. Thick walls, minimal sunlight, and a floor that always seems to sweat. In the centre, a giant scale hangs from a timber beam. Blocks are weighed in groups before being moved to a holding chamber. Accuracy matters. A few pounds off in every shipment and someone's ledger stops balancing. Near the corner you notice a peculiar contraption, a large wooden chute angled toward a waiting rail car. The chute is lined with thick leather and packed with straw. You watch as workers slide blocks down one by one, cushioned and guided gently into the wagon below. This is the transition, from horse to rail. The next leg will be faster, colder and riskier. There's no way to stop a train if temperatures spike unexpectedly along the way. A supervisor walks past, clipboard in hand, grumbling about last week's mess in Hartford. Apparently one shipment sat on a siding too long under weak cloud cover. Half the carload gone into the soil. Melted ice doesn't get refunded. That's the rule. Outside, the train is huffing clouds of white steam, as if competing with the ice itself. You climb up to peek inside the insulated boxcar. The walls are lined with layers of cork and sawdust-stuffed canvas. It's a tight fit. Each car can carry hundreds of blocks if stacked precisely, like a jigsaw. No gaps, no shifting. Just ice pressed against ice. Sawdust pressed between like breadcrumbs in a mould. As the last few blocks are loaded, a man claps shut the doors with a thud and seals them with tar-covered canvas. The train groans, the whistle screams, and it begins to pull away, carrying yesterday's frozen lake toward tomorrow's banquet tables. Back inside the depot, a different team starts sweeping up the sawdust left behind. They don't waste it. Even that is gathered and dried for reuse. You ask one man if the sawdust ever catches fire sitting around like this. He nods grimly. Had a whole shed go up last summer, he mutters. Smelled like roasting pine and lost wages. He doesn't laugh. A bell rings. The next wagon train is arriving from the north. The cycle begins again. You step outside and breathe in deeply. The sun is setting now, casting orange streaks across the snow. Another day of moving ice, inch by inch, through a world that constantly wants to melt it. And the strange part, most people who enjoy that chilled glass of lemonade at the end of this journey will never think of any of this. Not the aching backs, not the broken axles, not the trains lined with cork and hope, but you'll remember, you were there, you followed the trail and the ice is still moving. You stand on the deck of a wooden cargo ship, staring down into the hold where layer upon layer of ice blocks glisten beneath thick sawdust and burlap. The scent down there is musty, piney and slightly sour, like damp barrels in a cellar. Above you, seagulls circle, their cries lost in the creak of masts and slap of sails in a stiff Atlantic breeze. The harbour is humming, ropes snapping taut, men shouting over crates. But your cargo isn't fruit or fish or flour, it's ice. And you're headed for the tropics. It feels impossible. And yet here it is, an entire hull filled with frozen water about to sail into regions where the air never dips below 30 degrees Celsius. The year is 1856, and this is the cutting edge of global luxury. Chilled drinks in Calcutta, frozen desserts in Havana, even cold compresses in hospitals across Rio. All made possible by an unlikely export from the frigid lakes of New England. The crew treats it with a strange mix of reverence and resentment. On one hand, ice is precious. It means bonuses, better contracts, and prestige if delivered intact. On the other hand, it's cursed cargo. It doesn't behave like other freight. It leaks, it shifts, it sweats, and worst of all, it melts. Quietly, constantly, without a sound, eating into profit with every nautical mile. The captain joins you at the rail, his face weathered and his coat stained with salt. We lose 20% before we even cross the tropic, he says almost cheerfully, and if we anchor too long in port, it'll be soup before sundown. You glance up at the sails, already straining to catch more wind. Time isn't just money here, it's ice. Below deck, labourers shovel fresh sawdust into corners and crevices, patching weak insulation like doctors treating wounds. Every degree of warmth must be fended off. The ship itself becomes a floating cooler, only with wood, tar and guesswork instead of refrigeration. As you walk the deck, one of the crewmen tells you about a trick some traders use in Havana, selling the water from melted ice as New England drinking water. The locals apparently love the taste, clean, soft, foreign. It sounds ridiculous. And yet, in this business, every drop has a value. Night falls quickly, the sky turning to velvet and the stars flickering like frost in reverse. The ocean is calm, almost glassy, and the ship glides forward as if it too knows how delicate the balance is. In the crew's mess, you listen to stories. One man tells of a shipment that arrived in Manila with just 3 blocks intact, down from 200. Another swears they once lost half a load after stopping near the equator for repairs that turned out to be a gambling detour by the captain. Still, every man aboard keeps shipping, because even a partial load, even a whisper of cold in the tropics sells like gold. Back in your bunk you try to sleep, but the hull groans, and somewhere beneath you, you swear you can hear the slow drip, drip, drip of profit turning into puddle. Dawn breaks over the Indian Ocean, and the air feels heavier now, thicker, wet with humidity. The crew's already up, hauling canvas, checking ropes, swabbing puddles. Beneath your boots, the deck feels faintly damp. It's not from rain. It's from the hold. The ice is sweating. You descend the narrow ladder into the cargo bay, and the smell hits first. Wood, salt, and warm sawdust. The temperature is still cool compared to the tropical air outside, but not enough. Not anymore. You feel it. A softness in the burlap wrapping. A quiet defeat in the workers' silence. The melt has begun in earnest. They move quickly now, rearranging what's left, shifting blocks toward the centre where insulation is thickest, piling new layers of sawdust in vulnerable corners. One man, clearly the veteran among them, mutters that it always starts the same way. One humid night, one slow leak, and the rest is just containment. Yet the destination is close. By midday, you see the coast of India rising like smoke from the sea. Palms, white buildings, and the curved shape of a port full of wooden hulls and stone piers. Calcutta, the final stop for this shipment of frostbitten treasure. Docking is a frenzy. Porters scramble to prepare wagons padded with straw and lined with canvas. Timing is everything. If the ice sits too long in the sun, it could melt before reaching the storage vaults built just outside the city. And even if it arrives, local heat may undo the weeks of careful preservation in a matter of hours. Still, anticipation buzzes through the dock. The British colonial elite await these blocks eagerly. Their clubs, homes, and hotels demand chilled drinks and iced desserts. A social dinner without cold punch is simply unthinkable now, even in 100-degree heat. You ride along with the first wagon load, trailing behind two men fanning the cargo with folded palm leaves, an improvised shade in a land where snow is only a myth. Children run alongside, pointing at the dripping blocks like they're watching magic melt. To them this is sorcery. Frozen water, solid as stone, in a place where the ground never cools. The wagon lurches to a halt in front of a whitewashed building, an ice depot disguised as a storeroom. Inside it's dark, thick-walled, and lined with brick coated in lime to keep the temperature low. The ice is unpacked quickly, gently. A few blocks arrive, partially melted. Others seem solid, nearly perfect. The workers don't speak. They just nod. It's good enough. One block, clear, clean, barely sweating, is pulled aside and wrapped in linen. It's headed to the governor's mansion for a diplomatic dinner. It will be carved into chunks with silver tongs, dropped into glasses of imported brandy, and passed around as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But you know better. You were there when it was born from a New England lake. You saw it cut, dragged, stacked, shipped. You watched it sweat through the tropics, clinging to life through sawdust and salt. And now, here it is, resting briefly in the heart of India before it vanishes into memory. A puddle with a passport. You duck your head and step into the gloom of a countryside estate outside London, where the garden paths are stiff with frost and the chimney smoke rises into a pale blue sky. At first glance, the grounds seem ordinary. Clipped hedges, sleeping flower beds, a stone fountain crusted with ice. But beneath your boots lies the true prize, buried deep, silent, and cold. The ice house. Not a house at all, really. More like a man-made cave. You follow the gardener around the back of the property, past a gate that creaks in protest, and down a narrow path lined with yew trees. At the end stands a squat stone dome, covered in moss and half sunken into the ground. A thick wooden door blocks the entrance, bolted with rusted iron. The gardener grunts as he levers it open. A wave of cold breathes out from the dark. You step inside, boots scuffing against the damp floor. The walls are brick, curved and layered with lime plaster to resist the slow creep of heat. The air is still, dead still. And in the centre, buried beneath mounds of sawdust and linen sacks, is the winter's hoard. Solid blocks of imported ice. Some of it comes from the lakes of Massachusetts, some, perhaps, from Norway. Most Londoners wouldn't know the difference. But the master of this house insists. He only purchases from Wenham Lake. Clearer than glass, the butler boasts, and slower to melt. You stoop beside one of the blocks, brushing aside the sawdust with gloved hands. It's beautiful. Blue-tinted, smooth as marble. The sawdust sticks to your sleeves like fine sand. The butler tells you they restock this chamber twice a year. The layers are packed in spring and autumn. In between, the thick earth walls and careful air traps do the rest. He gestures upward, pointing out a subtle design feature, a vent at the top of the dome. Hot air rises, and in summer, that one tiny escape hatch helps balance the interior temperature just enough to stretch the ice's life by weeks. You ask him how long the blocks last. He shrugs. Long enough, he says, as long as no one meddles. He doesn't say it, but you sense the unspoken truth. Servants sometimes sneak a chip of ice for themselves, for tea, for sore heads, for the novelty of watching it vanish on the tongue. The master disapproves, of course. Ice is a symbol here, a silent emblem of wealth, imported from oceans away, hidden underground like treasure. Later you follow him back toward the manor kitchen. There's no sign of refrigeration, just stone slabs, hanging meats, and tins of preserved goods. But in one corner stands a wooden chest lined with tin and filled with ice shavings. A cook reaches in, pulls out a bowl of cream and nods approvingly. Still cool, she says. Still good. The butler watches with quiet pride. That ice house, buried and forgotten by most of the household, has done its job again. Outside, the winter sun begins to warm the garden paths. Somewhere underfoot, the ice shifts slightly, creaking as it settles. You realise this is how the rich control time, not with clocks, with cold. You find yourself lingering near the edge of the estate grounds, where a second ice house, older, less pristine, sinks into the earth like a forgotten mouth. This one hasn't been opened in years. The gardener calls it the ghost house, half-jokingly. The door creaks on its hinges and the air inside is damp, not cold. The insulation failed long ago and now it stores nothing but shadows and memories. Still, it tells you something. You step out and walk down the village road to the outskirts of London proper, where the grand country estates fade into the practical rows of the city. Here, the ice houses are less elegant and more functional, wedged behind shops, inside narrow alleys, or beneath butcher cellars. You visit one tucked behind a tea merchant's warehouse. A plain door leads down a steep stairwell, where a chamber built of thick brick holds what's left of last month's order. The ice is smaller, stacked in uneven chunks, but still solid. It keeps the tins of milk cold and the tins of clotted cream from spoiling. The merchant, sleeves rolled and voice-clipped, shows you a ledger. Each block is counted, tracked, weighed, not a cube wasted. He even logs the rate of melt by week, adjusting future shipments to match the seasons. We don't guess here, he tells you. We measure. Ice is coin. Nearby, you overhear two boys on the street watching as men unload a fresh delivery from the canal. The younger one asks, "What happens if it melts on the way?" The older shrugs. "Then it's water. You can't charge for water." They burst into laughter, but you sense something deeper in the joke, an understanding of fragility. Across town, you visit a boarding school that's just installed a small domestic ice house, tucked discreetly into the garden. The headmaster, proud of his modernity, explains how it allows him to serve chilled lemonade in summer. Nothing improves obedience like cold refreshment, he says with a wink. Even more surprising is a pub nearby, recently upgraded with a deep cellared pit lined with straw and iron hooks. The landlord shows off his new ice blocks, suspended just above the barrels, dripping gently. Keeps the ale respectable, he boasts, and brings in the gentry. As evening falls, you stroll through the alleys behind Covent Garden, where vendors still carry buckets of chipped ice wrapped in rags, selling them by the handful to stall owners. One man offers you a sliver for a penny. You take it. It melts on your tongue with the clarity of snow, then vanishes without a trace. The truth becomes clear. Beneath the surface of Victorian order and class, there's an entire architecture built on cold, a network of storage chambers, delivery schedules, and habits designed to fight a losing battle against time and temperature. A hidden world shivering just below the crust of civilization, and every single one of them, lord, cook, merchant, barkeep, is relying on a hole in the ground, some sawdust, and a little hope that winter will last just long enough. You push through the clamour of a sweltering summer street in central London, your boots slipping slightly on slick cobblestones as vendors cry out from every direction. Eels, cabbages, ribbons, and candles. But among the usual chaos, one voice cuts through with unusual power. Ice, fresh American ice, by the pound or the block. You turn to see him, a wiry man in a dusty cap, wheeling a small handcart lined with thick wool and dripping steadily onto the stones. The cart is stacked with glistening chunks of ice, sparkling under the harsh July sun like diamonds caught out of season. Around him, a small crowd has gathered. A housemaid in a flour-dusted apron clutching a halfpenny, a butcher's boy with a tin pail, a man in a waistcoat wiping his brow with a crumpled rag. For all of them, this ice isn't luxury, it's lifeline. You move closer, watching as the vendor wraps one jagged sliver in cloth and drops it into the maid's waiting hands. She hurries off toward the alleys, likely to return to a kitchen where butter's melting and milk is souring before noon. This is the street-level war of the ice trade, and it's fierce. You learn quickly that there's more than one supplier on this block. 3 carts are visible by midday, each claiming better quality, slower melt, cleaner source. One has painted Wenham Lake across the side in flaking blue letters. Another insists his stock is Norwegian crystal. Now, truth is, most of it comes from the same warehouse down by the Thames, where blocks are hacked apart and redistributed by middlemen who shave off just enough to make a profit, and never quite enough to make it last. As you follow the carts through twisting back streets, you start to hear the rumours. A few days ago, someone dumped a rival stock into a sewer grate at dawn. Last week, 2 carts collided near Fleet Street. One man blamed, the other vanished. No one was arrested. Just business. But not all rivalries are violent. Some are clever. You trail one vendor into a narrow alley off Drury Lane. He pauses beside a tavern and taps twice on the side door. A boy opens it, accepts a small wrapped bundle, and exchanges it for 2 brown coins. No words, just the rhythm of commerce. Later you hear that same boy hawking iced gin to afternoon drinkers. And those drinkers, they don't care who supplied the ice, only that their glass sings with cold when it touches the lips. One vendor confesses that he keeps a notebook of his rivals' routes and rest days. He plans his rounds like a general drawing battle lines. Can't waste time barking up a street that's already been bitten, he chuckles. By late afternoon, the temperature has climbed high enough to soften wax. The carts drip faster now. Vendors start shouting louder, trying to sell what's left before it becomes worthless. One man even offers 2 for 1, his blocks visibly shrinking in the sun. You realise the desperation in their cries isn't just performance, it's real. In this moment, each cart is a melting hourglass, its product turning to water beneath their hands, and in London's heat, victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the swiftest. You wander deeper into the labyrinth of London's neighbourhoods, where the alleys narrow and the stone walls sweat with heat. The cry of the ice vendors fades into the distance, replaced by the everyday sounds of city life. Laundry snapping on lines, hooves clattering, the dull clang of iron on stone. But ice is still here, only now it's hiding in plain sight. You step into a corner bakery, where the air is heavy with the scent of yeast and scorched sugar. Behind the counter, a woman kneads dough with one hand and gestures with the other toward a wooden box tucked into the shadowy corner. The lid creaks open to reveal a compartment filled with chipped ice and 2 jugs of cream. Can't keep the custards from curdling otherwise, she mutters, wiping her forehead with a flour-dusted wrist. She paid 3 shillings this week for a single delivery. An indulgence certainly, but a necessary one. The big shops have their own ice bins now, she tells you. We small ones have to beg, borrow, or bribe to keep our cream from spoiling before the bell rings for tea. You nod, stepping outside just as a small boy rushes past carrying a cracked porcelain bowl with a cloth-covered mound inside. You follow him down the block to a modest tea room with polished windows and lace curtains, where he delivers the ice to a woman with a notepad and a permanent frown. She inspects it like it's fish. Satisfied, she hands him a bun and a few coppers. Even the city's tiniest luxuries depend on these exchanges, silent, quick, and measured in melting seconds. As evening approaches, you visit a boarding house off the Strand where lodgers gather in the common kitchen. A single chipped ice block sweats quietly in a tin tray beside a jug of lemonade. The air is stifling, but for a moment the room feels cooler, just from knowing the ice is there. A child presses a finger to it, gasps, then grins. You watch her giggle as it melts down her wrist, vanishing in rivulets. Later, by gaslight, you sit at the back of a small public house where a fiddler plays and the barkeep chips ice into tin mugs of ale. His hands are fast, practiced. We keep it in the cellar, he says, wrapped in old coats and dry straw. Most nights it lasts long enough. Barely. Then, almost as an afterthought, he leans in and whispers, "Sometimes I get mine from across the river. Cheaper, if you don't mind a bit of bark or sawdust in your drink." You smile politely, but the truth settles deep. The ice trade is not just a marvel of logistics. It's a delicate street-by-street dance of timing, access, and quiet deals. It's vendors in the sun, cooks in the back room, bartenders with side sauces, and housewives haggling over ounces. By nightfall, London sighs in the dark, heat rising from every roof tile and flagstone, and somewhere, in dozens of cellars and closets and creaky wooden boxes, ice is silently disappearing, slipping away hour by hour, block by block, while no one watches. Everyone depends on it, and no one expects it to last. You step through the servants' entrance of a tall London townhouse, where the ceiling is low, the light dim, and the scent of boiled beef clings to every timber. The kitchen hums with movement, footsteps thudding overhead, kettles hissing, spoons clinking against copper pots. But down here, the real action is at the far end of the scullery, where the ice chest sits like a silent sentinel. It's not much to look at. Just a stout wooden box lined with tin, with a hinged lid and a steady drip into a shallow tray beneath. But inside, packed around stoneware jugs of cream and soft wedges of cheese, lies a block of ice as precious as any silver candelabra upstairs. A young scullery maid lifts the lid and winces. "Smaller than it was this morning," she murmurs, adjusting the cloth draped over it. "We'll be lucky to keep the trout chilled till dinner." You crouch beside her, peering into the box. The ice is still clear, but thin now, edges sloughing off like melting glass. It's been chipped away steadily throughout the day, used to cool jellies, to pack a glazed ham, to freshen the cucumber slices served to the mistress during her afternoon reading. The maid leans close and whispers, "Sometimes I take a piece for myself, not for anything fancy, just to hold, on the back of my neck or my wrist." She shrugs. It feels like another world. Above you, the sharp clack of shoes on the upper floor signals the return of the butler. The kitchen staff snaps to attention. The ice will be needed soon. The master is hosting a dinner, and cold butter must be served with the bread, not softened, not dripping. Presentation matters. The chill of the butter must match the chill of the white wine. You follow the butler up the servants' stairs, emerging into the dining room, a space of linen, crystal, and gold-rimmed china. The air is cooler here, though not by magic. Somewhere behind a screen, a servant fans the room with a cloth paddle, trying to keep the illusion intact. On a silver platter, a bowl of ice cubes glitters beside a carafe of lemonade. The guests murmur approval. "Wenham Lake, no doubt," one says, as if identifying the source of a vintage wine. "You know better. That block came from the East India docks, chipped by hand and rushed across town in the back of a covered cart. Later, as dessert arrives, a moulded jelly that quivers delicately on a cut-glass pedestal, you notice a servant quietly rotating the ice beneath it. The heat from the candles is already threatening its structure. One wrong move, and the whole display might slump sideways, a glistening mess. But for now, it holds. And so does the illusion. Up here, in the world of white gloves and silver spoons, the ice appears eternal. A simple, elegant fact. It is cold because it must be cold. Downstairs, in the swelter of the scullery, it's a race, a discipline, a quiet battle waged by invisible hands trying to hold the line against time and temperature. And no one upstairs gives it a second thought. You return downstairs just in time to see the scullery door swing open, revealing a delivery boy with his sleeves rolled and cheeks flushed from the summer heat. He lugs in a canvas-wrapped bundle, today's second block, smaller than the first, and already weeping through the fabric. The cook clucks her tongue and checks the weight with a practised eye. "Half the size for the same price," she mutters. "They think we don't notice." She's not wrong. The block is irregular, one corner already melting to slush. It's still usable, but barely. It will be chipped apart carefully and rationed out. Some for the cheeses, a bit for the claret jug, the rest stored for tomorrow's breakfast cream. There's no room for waste, and certainly no margin for pride. The delivery boy wipes his forehead and glances around. "They're getting stingy," he says quietly. "One of the houses on Belgrave Square, they've taken to using frozen water bottles instead. Freeze 'em, reuse 'em. Says it's cleaner than sawdust blocks." He rolls his eyes. "Right, until the whole thing bursts in the night." You help him carry the block to the icebox, where the maid, sleeves pinned, hair damp with sweat, has already stripped out the melted remains of the morning's ration. She works quickly, tucking the new block into place and layering clean linen over top. The entire process takes less than 2 minutes, but it feels like a ritual. Swift, silent, sacred. Back in the main kitchen, the atmosphere has shifted. The oven is roaring for the roast. Steam clouds the windows. The butter has been transferred to a ceramic dish, just above the new block. Everything is timed down to the quarter hour, because in this kitchen, the ice dictates the rhythm. You peek into a side pantry where the wine sits nestled in damp straw, and flanked on either side by metal trays filled with slush. The butler doesn't trust the staff to chill the wine too cold. "English cold," he once explained, "not Russian. No one wants frozen claret." It's a strange hierarchy. The master commands the servants command the household, and the ice commands them all. Without it, the cream curdles, the fish stinks, the butter melts. The image of dignity served upstairs, cold jellies, crisp lettuces, icy cordial, is built on this fragile thawing foundation. Later, after the guests have gone and the plates are scraped clean, the staff gathers in the narrow kitchen corridor, slumped on stools and crates. The maid lifts the icebox lid one last time and lets out a soft breath. Only a fragment remains, no larger than her palm. She doesn't say anything. She just picks it up, turns it in her hand until it glistens, then sets it on a saucer to melt quietly overnight. No one needs it now. The day is done. You sit there with them as the final droplets trickle into the catch tray, knowing that by dawn it'll be gone. And with it, the illusion of control, the polite fiction that the house runs on elegance and order, not sweat and melting blocks. But tomorrow, the cart will arrive again, the dance will begin again, and the war with heat will resume beneath the silken tablecloths and behind the scullery door. The sun glints off the brass letterbox as you step into a modest but newly built home in one of London's outer boroughs. Rows of red brick terraces lined with iron railings, each one nearly identical but proud. Inside, the parlour is neatly arranged, curtains starched, and a floral rug sits centred like a badge of arrival. This is middle-class respectability, rising with the smoke of factory chimneys and the steady tick of salaried office work. But what really catches your eye is in the kitchen, a polished wooden cabinet standing alone with 2 doors and a subtle tray beneath. The mistress of the house glides over proudly. "Our new icebox," she announces, smoothing her apron. "Real American make. Isn't it marvellous? You lean in and open the door. Inside, at the top, a solid block of ice rests in a tin-lined compartment, cold radiating from it like a quiet engine. Below, butter, milk, a dish of blancmange and a few eggs sit nestled in their cool sanctuary. Nothing smells sour, nothing sloshes. It's a miracle in oaken metal. She closes the door gently. Before this, she says, we used a stone shelf by the pantry window. Half the week the milk turned. Now we have ice delivered every Monday, and if I wrap the block just so, it lasts till Friday. You admire the precision. The ice is a weekly guest, welcomed, budgeted, revered. Her husband appears in the doorway, cravat loosened, sleeves rolled. Costs nearly £1 a week, he says with a smile that's part complaint, part pride. But the neighbours notice. The Thompsons still use crocs in the stairwell, he chuckles. Imagine eating room-temperature blancmange. He's not wrong. In this part of town, the icebox is more than convenience. It's a social signal. A symbol that they've stepped up the ladder, that their butter no longer swims, that their jellies hold shape. Their son bursts in from the garden, clutching a brown paper parcel and flushed from running. He beelines for the kitchen and opens the icebox like a bank vault. Is there any left? He asks, peeking into the top compartment. His mother gently swats his hand. It's for Sunday's pudding. Close the door, darling. The boy sighs but obeys. Even at his age, he knows. Ice is not to be wasted. Later, you're invited to stay for tea. A small glass dish is placed in front of you, filled with chilled gooseberries and set on a doily. The spoon clicks softly as you taste. It's subtle, but the cold elevates everything. Sharp, refreshing, almost regal. The mother smiles as you nod in appreciation. She doesn't say it, but she's watching closely. She wants you to notice, and you do. This isn't the extravagance of Belgravia or the scrape-together tricks of the alleyways. This is something new, a quiet transformation, humming in homes with pianos and newspaper subscriptions. The refrigerator has not been invented yet. Electricity is still decades from changing everything. But in this moment, in this kitchen, the future is sitting politely in a wooden box, dripping one drop at a time into a copper tray, and no one wants to go back. Evening settles softly over the street, and as lamps flicker to life behind lace curtains, you follow the quiet rhythm of the neighbourhood. It's supper time now. In kitchen after kitchen, tea is being poured, plates scraped clean, and icebox lids gently lifted. The ritual is universal. Quickly check the melt, slide a dish into the cool lower chamber, maybe chip off a corner of the ice block if someone's feeling indulgent. In one home, a young mother presses a glass of cold milk into her daughter's hands, proud that it hasn't curdled. In another, a husband carefully pulls out a tin of butter, still firm despite the heat outside, and lays it next to bread slices stacked like folded handkerchiefs. You peer into a modest rear garden where a woman in her apron is emptying the drip tray beneath the icebox. She moves with practiced ease, tipping the meltwater into a small watering can. No sense wasting it, she says with a smile, noticing your glance. The roses don't care where it came from. She's not the only one thinking practically. 2 houses down, the man of the house is tinkering with a new idea, lining the interior of his icebox with an extra layer of cork, salvaged from old wine crates. Keeps the chill in longer, he claims, proudly tapping the box like a trusted tool. Let the Joneses buy another block every 4 days. I'll stretch mine to 6. And still, not everything is perfect. You pass by a house where the ice didn't arrive. The wife stands in the entryway, arms crossed, fanning herself with a rolled-up magazine. The delivery boy never came. Broken wheel, they said. So now the blancmange's gone soft, she grumbles to her neighbour, and the fish'll need salting. There's a quiet tension here. No shouting, no real disaster, but a shared recognition that cold is fragile, and the systems they've built around it, these tidy domestic empires of puddings, preserves, and proper appearances, are only as strong as the next block of ice. Back in the kitchen where you started, the mother checks the icebox one last time before bed. The lid creaks. A curl of condensation clings to the rim. She nods, satisfied, and closes it gently. She doesn't know it, but she's part of a quiet revolution. These small wooden cabinets, one in every 10th home now, soon one in every 5th, are reshaping habits. Food lasts longer, menus expand, illness from spoiled milk begins to fade, even the pace of housekeeping shifts, no longer ruled by the tyranny of rot. And though the newspapers speak of railways, empires and parliament, you sense that this subtle battle with heat in every corner of the city is just as transformative. By the time you step outside again, the moon has risen and the cobblestones are slick with dew. Somewhere in the distance a cart creaks by, heading toward the morning markets, probably carrying the next day's supply, wrapped in canvas, packed in sawdust, still whispering with cold. And in the hush of that night you realise the age of refrigeration hasn't yet arrived. But the world is already changing, one melting block at a time. You step through the wide gates of St Bartholomew's Hospital just as the morning haze begins to lift, and London's summer heat creeps back into the cobbled courtyards. The stone walls soak in the warmth, radiating it in long, suffocating waves. Inside the main ward, windows are flung open, and linen sheets hang limp over the edges of beds. A nurse wipes her brow with a corner of her cap. The scent of carbolic soap drifts faintly through the air, doing little to mask the underlying musk of sweat and antiseptic. And yet, in the far corner, where the sunlight is weakest and the air just a bit cooler, sits the hospital's most precious and perishable resource, a modest wooden chest packed with ice. A young orderly opens it with care, reaching inside with linen-wrapped hands. From beneath a blanket of sawdust he retrieves a sliver, roughly carved and glistening, before rushing to the bedside of a fevered child. The nurse takes the fragment, wraps it in damp cloth, and places it against the boy's flushed forehead. The boy flinches, then stills. His breathing eases. The room exhales with him. You watch this quiet miracle unfold. There are no machines here, no thermometers beeping, no cooling fans or compressors. Just cold, borrowed from a New England lake and carried halfway around the world, now pressed gently against skin that burns too hot for comfort. In the hallway, a doctor examines a tray lined with metal basins filled with chipped ice. He explains how they rotate blocks between fever patients, 10 minutes per limb, no more, or the skin goes numb. You sense a practiced desperation in his tone. "We're only ever 3 days ahead," he says. "If the delivery's late, we start choosing who gets the last of it." You nod quietly. In this setting, ice isn't luxury, it's triage. Further down the corridor you pass a surgery room. There's no anaesthesia here, not really. Not yet. Ether and chloroform are only used for the bravest or richest. But the nurses have another trick. They keep a pail of ice near the instruments. Tools are cooled between uses to dull the sensation. Sometimes ice is even packed around a wound site to numb it before the first incision. Crude, imperfect, but better than nothing. One nurse tells you how they once tried to preserve a body for transport. Just a day, just long enough for family to arrive. Packed him in ice all night, she says. Didn't stop the change, only slowed it. She doesn't dwell on the details, but her voice lowers to a whisper when she adds, "The morgue boys stole half the block before dawn." You move past rows of patients, some bandaged, some sleeping, some quietly groaning, and you start to notice a pattern. Those nearest the windows get the breeze. Those nearest the ice chest get the calm. The rest must wait. And though the wards are full of voices, cries, murmurs, footsteps, you find your attention pulled again and again to the slow, steady sound of dripping from the chest. Each drop, a little mercy. Each hour, a race. Each block, a fading shield against the city's relentless heat. In the basement of the hospital, down a narrow staircase behind the dispensary, you follow the scent of damp stone and iron. Here, beneath the hum of patients above, lies the institution's ice storage. Part cellar, part shrine. The walls are thick, the ceiling low, and the air bitingly cold compared to the wards. 3 blocks remain, each resting on raised wooden pallets, shrouded in a fog of sawdust and melting condensation. An older porter, sleeves rolled and fingers red from exposure, nods as you enter. He's the ice steward of sorts. His job, to track every pound, every delivery, and every flake of shaved frost that leaves the room. He keeps a notebook in his vest pocket, sweat-stained and fraying at the corners, where he tallies each withdrawal. Not for bureaucracy, for fairness. Ice doesn't argue, he says, tapping the block with a long-handled hook. It just vanishes. So best to keep honest about where it goes. He's not the only one who thinks this way. Upstairs, the nurse matron holds her own list. She rationed £3 yesterday, one for the surgery, one for the children's ward, and one for a private room where a fevered gentleman from India is said to be connected to a shipping company. No one said it aloud, but his ice was slightly clearer, slightly cleaner, slightly larger. Money has its own medicine. Later, you're invited to sit in on a consultation. The physician stands beside a young woman with sunken cheeks and a persistent rattle in her lungs. Cool compresses only, he says. She's too weak for quinine now. A nurse nods and signals down the hall. Moments later, a chipped metal basin arrives, half filled with shaved ice and a muslin cloth. It's not treatment. Not really. It's comfort. And even comfort here is rationed. In the adjacent hallway, a new delivery arrives. 2 blocks, wrapped in straw and already sweating. The porter shakes his head as he inspects them. Too thin, he mutters, and one's cracked. A split block melts faster, loses integrity. He marks it down anyway. They'll use it for foot soaks and sponge baths. You overhear whispers between 2 nurses about the children's wing. One girl has diphtheria, another hasn't eaten in days. Let them hold a cube, one suggests quietly. It helps the mouth, feels like something sweet. It's true, some children too sick to chew or swallow find strange delight in sucking ice chips, cold comfort in the most literal sense. The hospital doesn't advertise this dependency. To donors they boast about modern lamps, improved bedding, or imported linens. No one writes checks for sawdust and melting cubes. But in the background, it's the ice that holds the line between agony and calm. As night falls, the porter returns to the cellar. He lights a lantern and checks the tally. 1 block left unclaimed. He hesitates, then removes a sliver and places it in a wrapped cloth. You follow him upstairs, down the quiet corridor of the women's ward, and into a room where a girl no older than 10 tosses and moans in her sheets. The nurse steps aside as he hands her the cloth. She presses it to her lips. Her body relaxes. No fanfare, no thanks. Just 1 more hour of peace. And below, the last block keeps dripping. The sun blazes down over Hyde Park, baking the gravel paths and wilting the edges of straw bonnets. It's a holiday afternoon in London, and the park is humming with life. Families strolling, boys chasing hoops, and carriages gliding past in slow, stately rhythm. But your attention is drawn to a particular corner near the Serpentine, where a crowd has gathered not for a sermon or a show, but for something far colder. A bright striped awning flutters in the breeze, shading a wooden pushcart with ornate painted letters. Ice creams, flavoured Wundy. You draw closer. Behind the cart stands a man in a waistcoat and sweat-streaked collar, carefully lifting a tin mould from a sunken chamber packed with salt and shaved ice. Inside the tin, moulded into neat domes, is what looks like frozen cream, tinted pale yellow, soft pink, and an almost luminous lavender. He calls out the flavours as if reciting poetry. Lemon ice, rose water, orange blossom, and vanilla. Real vanilla. A child tugs at his mother's sleeve. A gentleman leans in, pretending he's buying for his niece. A nursemaid pulls a copper penny from her reticule, exchanging it for a delicate scoop served on a wafer-thin slate. You finally receive your own. A small, trembling dome of violet ice, melting already at the edges. The first taste is arresting. Not just sweet, but perfumed. Cold in a way that startles your teeth. A mouthful of frozen fragrance. It's more than dessert. It's sorcery. But behind the delight lies industry. As you peer around the back of the cart, you spot the real labour, a lower chamber packed with cracked ice and coarse salt. This mixture isn't for cooling, it's for freezing. Salt lowers the temperature around the cream moulds enough to solidify them, even in the open air. The vendor wipes his brow and checks the block nestled below. It's half its original size, slick and sweating into a tin basin. "We'll be done by 4, he mutters, "if the sun doesn't steal it first." You strike up conversation. He tells you the ice came yesterday from the docks, broken off a larger shipment meant for a restaurant near Piccadilly. "They sold me what wouldn't fit," he says. "I get what melts too fast for their sellers, and I turn it into joy." Joy, indeed. A pair of street musicians are set up nearby, playing a waltz while 2 girls in white gloves try to eat their ices before they dissolve. Every tongue in the crowd seems to glitter with syrup. For some children, this is their first taste of anything truly cold. A boy drops his. It splats into the dust, pale yellow against grey gravel. He begins to cry, but the vendor shakes his head, reaches into his dwindling stash, and gives the boy another. A gift, a gesture. The boy stares in wonder, eyes wide as the moon. Later, as the shadows stretch and the tin moulds empty, the vendor begins to pack up. He carefully ladles the last of the ice and salt mixture into a lidded bucket, saving what he can for tomorrow. But it's clear this moment, this gathering of sweetness and snow on a summer's day, won't last much longer. And maybe that's the magic. You follow the vendor as he pushes his empty cart slowly toward the edge of the park, wheels groaning slightly under the weight of dripping water and lingering sugar. A few children trail behind, hopeful for scraps or another miraculous free scoop, but he waves them off with a tired smile. The magic has melted. What's left now is just work. At the edge of a mews, he stops beside a wooden shed tucked behind a row of narrow houses. With effort, he lifts the lid of a storage bin built into the ground. Inside, wrapped in old sailcloth and straw, lies a single dwindling block of ice. Not for display, not even for tomorrow's trade. This is his emergency reserve. If the sun rises too hot, or the docks delay, he'll scrape this last remnant and try to stretch the illusion of cold for one more afternoon. He sighs as he brushes a layer of straw aside, revealing a muddy edge. "This one won't last the week," he mutters. "Might not even last 2 more customers." You walk with him to a nearby tenement house where his wife and daughter wait with a tin pail and folded cloth. They help clean the cart, rinsing the sticky moulds in water that's already warm. His daughter, no more than 7, steals a fingerful of melted syrup from the edge of a tin. He pretends not to see. Inside, they talk of tomorrow, of whether the market will still have lemons, whether the butcher's boy will trade salt again, whether the next block of ice will arrive whole or cracked. No one mentions how much of their day depends on something so fragile, so fleeting. You head back toward the park, retracing your steps past empty benches and trampled cones of melting slush. At a narrow alley corner, you see another cart, this one painted in red and gold, more polished, more professional. The vendor there wears a bowler hat and boasts of Italian ices with imported flavourings. His ice is fresher, his price is higher, but his crowd is smaller. The children seem to know where the better smiles are. As the last rays of sun sink behind the trees, you hear a gentle clink, a spoon against tin, a child's laugh, a pail being filled with chipped frost for the next morning. The world of cold sweetness is closing for the night, and still the memory lingers, a taste that vanished on the tongue, a chill that lived only long enough to delight, then disappear. For these Londoners, ice cream isn't daily indulgence. It's not boxed in paper tubs behind glass freezer doors. It's a rare performance, a treat laced with time and effort, a spoonful of winter carved from the labour of hundreds stored in darkness, carried across oceans and transformed into 2 mouthfuls of fleeting joy. Tomorrow they'll line up again, not just for the flavour, but for the wonder of cold on a warm London day. It's just past midnight when you slip through the fog-thickened alleys of Southwark, boots soft on the cobbles slick with river dew. The clamour of the day is long gone, replaced by the distant rumble of hooves, the occasional bark of a dog, and the whisper of something else. Wheels on wood, push slow and silent. You duck behind a stack of crates as a figure appears, hunched over a handcart. There's no sign, no paint, no flourish. Just a bundle, canvas-wrapped and leaking in tiny rivulets. He moves with purpose, glancing up at every crossroads before ducking into a rear courtyard flanked by shuttered windows. You follow. Inside the courtyard stands a backdoor tavern, closed, officially. But through the slats of a cellar vent you spot a flicker of candlelight. A knock, 2 slow taps, then a pause. The door opens just a crack. The man mutters something you can't hear, then pushes the cart inside. You wait, a minute, then 2. And when you slip in after him, careful not to make a sound, you see it. A hidden chamber behind the main tap room, with barrels stacked to the beams and crates of gin, but right in the centre, 3 fresh blocks of ice resting on straw mats, already beginning to mist. This isn't a hospital. This isn't Hyde Park. This is the other ice market, the one without ledgers or uniforms. A whisper network of publicans, fishmongers, backstreet apothecaries, and street vendors who can't, or won't, pay the official prices or wait for the city's sanctioned deliveries. Here, ice is bartered, traded, hidden, stolen. The man receives a stack of coins in a tightly bound cloth pouch. He doesn't count it. Just nods, takes a biscuit and flask of something sharp-smelling, and disappears back into the dark. The tavern owner, a round man with oil on his sleeves, sets to work. He chips 1 block into manageable shards, scooping them into 2 buckets. One he carries upstairs for tomorrow's breakfast cordial. The other he keeps in the corner, wrapped again, for a customer who pays well to have his oysters served like at the Savoy. No one asks where the ice came from. No one wants to know. The less said, the better. You wander through this quiet world for the next hour, through fish cellars where slabs of cod rest on dripping crates, through tiny sweet shops where one woman preserves her berries on cold tiles bought under the table, and finally to a boarding house where the landlord hoards a block in a cupboard under the stairs. It sits in a metal pail covered in a child's blanket. He peeks at it like a miser checking gold. "We use it only for guests," he whispers. "Makes them stay longer if the lemonade's cold." It's not quite theft, but it's not regulation either, and yet no one seems ashamed. In these parts of town you survive on what you can hold, before it melts, before it's taken, before someone else gets to it first. The legal ice trade moves in wagons and ledgers, but this one moves in shadows and silence, and both rely on the same thing, a fragile block of frozen time. Dawn is still a whisper on the horizon when you reach the back alley near Billingsgate Market. A porter yawns and unlocks the side gate with a rusty key, waving in a cart piled with burlap-wrapped bundles that clink faintly. Not metal, but something heavier, colder. Ice. Off the books. This isn't a scandal, it's a system, one the city pretends not to notice. Official deliveries come with tallies, taxes and warehouse slips. These are the extras. The crumbs swept from the table of the big contracts, resold quietly, sometimes days old, sometimes cracked or reshaped. But for a price they'll still chill a crate of oysters or save a grocer's butter from turning. You follow the porter to the fish stalls, where scales clink and water splashes. A woman in oilskin sleeves is already unpacking yesterday's catch, her fingers fast even in the chill. She receives a sliver of the smuggled block, no questions asked, and lays it over a tray of eels. The ice hisses faintly, meeting the flesh with a soft hiss like a sigh. It'll buy her 4 more hours of freshness. That's 4 more hours to sell, 4 more hours to pay the rent. She glances at you and grins. The fish keep longer than the truth some days. In a nearby booth, a confectioner accepts a bucket of frost chipped from one of the same illegal blocks. He uses it to chill a tray of almond paste sweets. Only way to make the shapes hold, he explains, smoothing them with the back of a silver spoon. And customers won't pay top price for sticky fingers. You pass a man selling ice chips in cloth-wrapped cones. He calls it crunch ice. Sweetened water frozen in trays and crushed for flavour. The truth? Half of it's melted down stock, what dripped overnight from the broken blocks. He adds a drop of lemon oil and calls it exotic. The queue doesn't care. Even apothecaries dabble in the grey trade. You visit one tucked behind a tobacco shop where a boy packs glass bottles in sawdust-chilled crates. Tinctures spoil in heat, he shrugs. We do what we must. He doesn't mention that his block of ice was delivered at 3 a.m, paid for in coin that never saw a ledger. Still, nothing about this world feels dangerous, only necessary. People speak softly, but not fearfully. They know they walk a line between the legal and the practical, not to break the law, but to bend it just enough to keep milk cold, fruit firm, wounds soothed, and customers coming back. And here's the truth. No one says out loud. The official ice trade doesn't reach everyone. Not the cramped streets, not the corner barbers or basement pubs. Without these informal routes, these twilight deliveries and barter box exchanges, the city's poor and working class would sweat and spoil, while others dined cool and dignified. You step out into the waking street as the sun finally cracks above the chimneys. A single drip rolls from your sleeve. Somewhere behind you, someone curses as a block splits. Another day begins, another shipment melts, and as the wheels roll, the city turns, not just on rules, but on ice that knows how to vanish quietly. A hot wind curls down from Clerkenwell and you taste soot in the air before you smell the smoke. Something's burning. The sky glows dull orange over the rooftops, and you follow the distant clang of bells toward the scene. By the time you reach it, a small warehouse is already engulfed. Flames lick up the walls like tongues, and a crowd has gathered. Aprons over mouths, eyes wide, children clutching their mothers' skirts. The fire brigade is here, but they're not moving with haste. The engine is steam-powered, but temperamental. The water barrels have been late in arriving. Men shout for hoses, for ladders, for buckets. Some simply shout. You watch as the neighbours form a bucket chain from a nearby pump, hands moving with practised rhythm. But someone else, someone you don't expect, arrives with a cart. Not filled with water, filled with ice. 3 thick blocks dragged under tarps, sweating heavily in the heat. A grocer, red-faced and wheezing, helps unload them near the burning building's outer wall. "Stack 'em," he shouts. "Press 'em against the back." The firemen hesitate. This isn't in any manual, but in the chaos someone obeys. A row of men rolls the slick, glistening blocks into place, stacking them too deep where the fire threatens to spread to the bakery next door. And for a moment, you witness something extraordinary. The flames recoil, steam bursts upward with a hiss, and the wall, already blistering from heat, holds. It's not that the ice puts out the fire, of course not, but it slows the advance. It buys time, 10 minutes, maybe 15, just enough for the water barrels to arrive, just enough for the brigade to reposition, just enough to save the row of homes behind. Later, when the worst has passed and the ashes settle, the grocer wipes his forehead and grins. Didn't think it'd work, he admits, but figured, I can get more ice, can't rebuild Mrs. Harrow's bakery. You walk with him back to his shop where the shelves are still intact and the windows only slightly smoked. The back room, where the ice was stored, now sits empty, just puddles and a dark stain where the tarps once rested. He doesn't seem to mind. It's strange, he says, how many things ice can do. We think of it for pudding and fish, but sometimes it just holds the world together long enough for help to arrive. You nod, and as the firemen pack up their hoses and the crowd begins to disperse, you realise something you hadn't considered before. In a city built from wood and coal and heat, ice isn't just comfort or indulgence, it's armour, silent, temporary, melting by the hour. But armour nonetheless. The day after the fire, the grocer becomes a minor legend on the street. Not for saving the block, though he did, but for the way he did it. Children reenact the moment with chalk and melting candles. An old man swears he saw steam form the shape of an angel. A local reporter even drops by to ask questions, but the grocer just shrugs and says, "It was cold, that's all." You return to the alley behind the bakery he helped save. The windows are open now, airing out the smoke. Inside, Mrs. Harrow is kneading dough as if nothing happened, her sleeves dusted with flour and her apron dark with sweat. She gestures to a small crate in the corner, half filled with chipped ice. "That's all we've got left," she says. "Used to chill the milk for the glaze," she smiles faintly. "Feels like a luxury after yesterday." She tells you something else, something almost too strange to believe. Before the fire reached her, she'd already started carrying her ice blocks outside, thinking she might trade them for help, or at least save them from melting in the blaze. But by the time she got to the street, the grocer was already there. "I thought I was mad," she says. He thought he was mad, but somehow madness saved us both. That afternoon, you walk through other streets scorched by similar disasters, rows of shops rebuilt, some not, and everywhere there are stories of ice used in ways no merchant could have predicted. A hat maker who wrapped his finest felts in burlap and laid them between ice blocks to keep them from catching fire in a summer flare-up. A bookseller who lined the walls of his basement with melting blocks during a nearby blaze, hoping the slow drip would keep the air humid enough to save the parchment. A seamstress who buried her sewing machine beneath ice-packed blankets when the fire bells rang, muttering a prayer that the metal wouldn't warp. None of it was in the fire code. None of it was guaranteed to work. But time and again, ice stepped in, not to extinguish the flames, but to stall them, to resist just long enough. In a city like London, where heat comes not only from weather but from gas lamps, steam kitchens, factory sparks and wood-burning stoves, fire is a constant threat. And yet the coldest thing in the city, harvested in a far-off forest, shipped across an ocean, dragged through alleyways and packed in sawdust, becomes a silent firefighter. At dusk you visit the grocer one last time. He's just received a new block, smaller than usual. He sets it in place with a grunt, then pauses. "Makes you wonder," he says quietly, "how many things we've lost that could have been saved with a bit more cold and a bit less waiting." You nod. Because you've seen what ice can do, not just in kitchens or tea trays, but in crises. Not just for flavour, but for time. And in a city always on the edge of flame, time is everything. You wipe a line of sweat from your brow as you step off the gangplank in Singapore, the tropical air slapping you like a damp curtain. It's the 1880s now, and though the harbour is still filled with sailboats and coal-fired steamers, the port has grown into a restless machine, ropes groaning, crates thudding, orders shouted in half a dozen languages. Somewhere in the noise, an overseer barks for caution. "The ice shipment's landed, get it under cover." You turn and follow the men hurrying toward a stack of wooden crates marked with stenciled letters. Boston Ice Co. The boxes drip steadily in the sun, each bead of condensation marking a lost second. These crates have travelled thousands of miles from Massachusetts, across the Atlantic, through the Suez Canal, past the steaming coasts of India, and into the Strait of Malacca, all to arrive here, sweating in the tropical glare. You walk alongside a pair of labourers as they haul one crate across the docks to a narrow wagon lined with woven mats. The driver sits beneath a wide straw hat, clucking at his oxen. There's no insulation here beyond what can be scraped together. Rice straw, bamboo slats, and old sacks of burlap soaked in brine and shaded by palm leaf screens. Primitive, yes, but in this heat, it's the only line of defence. The oxen plod forward. Your guide, a clerk from a shipping office, explains that these ice blocks are destined for private clients. He says it with a knowing look. A few embassies, some officers, certain clubs. One of the brothels, actually. They've got chilled champagne. Can you believe that? You pass a row of shop fronts where a group of boys are chasing each other barefoot. One of them stops and points. There, in the alley behind a cafe, men are unloading a small chipped block of ice into a clay-lined pit. Not for drinks, for meat. The cafe's cook, wiping his neck with a damp rag, grins at you. "Boon from heaven," he says in broken English. "Keeps fish longer, makes tea cold, ladies like cold tea." Further up the street, a European officer lounges beneath a ceiling fan, watching as a servant unpacks a crate padded in linen. Inside is a half-melted block no bigger than a hat box. The officer inspects it with mild approval. "Good enough for the gin," he mutters, already reaching for a bottle. The servant carries it off to the icebox. Really just a clay-lined wooden chest hidden under a table in the kitchen. And here you see the core of it. The ice didn't make it here in perfect shape. Not by a long shot. Of the 200 blocks shipped, perhaps 70 remain even partly intact. The rest turn to slush somewhere near Aden or Bombay. But those that survived, they're worth their weight in silver. A single cube in a cocktail at the European club, a chilled compress placed on a colonel's sunburned forehead, a rare spoonful of ice cream served at a Dutch-owned hotel to a child too sick to swallow warm broth. These are luxuries so fine, so absurd in this climate, that they border on the miraculous. But they're also fleeting, melting from the moment they touch the dock. And so, every shipment becomes a gamble. A test not just of supply and demand, but of how far cold can be stretched before it gives up the ghost. By the next morning the ice has already begun to vanish. Some into glasses, some into buckets, but much of it into nothing at all. You return to the docks just in time to witness the unloading of the last crate, and it isn't pretty. The sawdust has turned to sludge. The crate sides are warped from moisture. When the labourers pry it open, what remains isn't a block, but a misshapen lump, half melted, half fractured, barely enough to fill a small basin. The dockmaster curses softly in Malay and waves it away. "Throw it in the sea," he mutters. "Can't sell that to a man with a title." But someone else steps in. A barefoot vendor in a frayed shirt, face worn and creased, offers a few coins and a quiet word. He takes the soggy block with care, wraps it in fresh banana leaves, and places it in a straw-lined basket on the back of his push-cart. You trail him as he weaves through the streets of Singapore, past spice stalls and opium dens, past temples and billiard halls, until he stops outside a row of wooden homes perched on stilts. A small crowd is already waiting, mothers with handkerchiefs, a child holding an empty bowl, a man with a bucket of fish. The vendor lifts the leaf, revealing what little ice remains. He doesn't sell it. He shares it. One shard is given to the boy, who presses it to his lips and closes his eyes. A flake is dropped into the fish bucket, slowing the inevitable. A palmful is wrapped in cloth and handed to a woman whose baby burns with fever. No one speaks much. No one needs to. This isn't trade. This is tenderness. You watch as the ice disappears, not with grandeur, but in soft gestures, passed from hand to hand, drop by drop, until the last fragment has melted into a shallow puddle at the base of the cart. And the vendor? He just nods, folds up the leaf and moves on. Later that day, in the office of the European Club, a frustrated clerk tallies the losses from the shipment. "Half melted before it even reached the godforsaken port," he complains, "and they want another order next month." He tosses the logbook aside, unaware that half the city has already made peace with the melt. Because here, the point isn't how much ice survives the voyage, it's what's done with the little that remains. In a place where heat reigns and time feels syrup thick, ice becomes more than cool relief. It becomes grace, unexpected, undeserved, gone too soon, and yet always remembered. As the day fades and the cicadas begin their slow, rising hum, you realise something else. This was never just a trade of goods. It was a trade of hope. Block by block, melt by melt. You find yourself in a drawing room in Bristol, seated across from a widow in a high-collared black dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a thin letter resting on the table beside her untouched cup of tea. The air is still, heavy. The curtains are drawn not for mourning but to keep out the heat. You can smell wilted roses on the sideboard, and somewhere behind the door a clock ticks faintly, marking each second like a drip of melting ice. "He was supposed to return in June," she says at last, voice brittle. "The ship left Boston in March. He oversaw the cargo personally." Her husband was a shipping agent, part owner of an ice fleet that supplied clients in Madras, Singapore and Hong Kong. This last journey was meant to be routine. He'd gone dozens of times before, always returned with ledgers full of profit and shoes still crusted in sawdust. But this time, the weather turned. The ship was delayed off the coast of Ceylon. Rumours of mechanical failure spread through the merchant circles. By the time a telegram arrived, it simply read, "Cargo compromised. Crew ashore. Captain gravely ill." No mention of her husband. You glance at the letter beside her. Unopened. It arrived 2 days ago. She hasn't read it yet. "I already know what it says," she mutters, fingers trembling just slightly. "It says the cargo was lost. It says there's no insurance payout. It says I should take up the matter with the board." Her chin lifts a fraction. But they won't take responsibility. They never do. It'll be called a complication of heat. She offers a thin, sardonic smile. They never say it outright. But in this business, everyone knows. Melting is nobody's fault. You step into her husband's study, left as it was the day he departed. A globe, its paint faded, a stack of trade manifests, and pinned to the wall, a route chart tracing the ice fleet's journeys like arteries across the ocean. Red threads connect Maine to Madras, Boston to Bangkok. At the centre, a single pushpin in Bristol. You notice a smaller note scrawled on the corner of the chart. Delay, decay. You return to the parlour as the widow finally unfolds the letter. Her eyes scan quickly. She sighs. Storm off Ceylon. Failed condenser. No recoverable stock. She lets it fall to the floor. The ice was gone before it reached the bay, and with it, the investment. You ask gently if she'll pursue legal recourse. She shakes her head. It would cost more than the blocks themselves, and the company already moved on. They'll send another man, another ship, another load of hope, vanishing into steam. Later, as you walk the streets of Bristol under a pale evening sky, you think about all the invisible cost behind a block of ice. The sailors, the delays, the calculations of melt per hour, per mile, per degree. What's remarkable isn't just that the ice made it. It's how often it didn't, and how little was said when it failed. In a business where the product dissolves by nature, loss becomes routine, almost polite. But in that drawing room, quiet, heavy, and slowly warming, the cost felt anything but. The next day, you ride a mail coach through the damp hills of Gloucestershire, passing villages where the ice trade is little more than a rumour. But as the wheels rattle over cobbled lanes and wooden bridges, you read the headlines in the local paper tucked beneath your arm. Ice fleet loss, shipments melted, owners blame weather. Below the title, a short paragraph confirms what the widow feared. The board has issued a statement. They cite unusual temperatures and tropical conditions and natural evaporation. The phrase act of God is used, as if sunlight were a surprise. No mention of the missed maintenance. No mention of the crew who had warned about the condenser valves. Just the melt. By the time you reach town, you stop into the local post office, where a second report is being read aloud by the clerk to a group of merchants. They scoff and mutter. Should have known better than to ship that far without guarantees, one laughs darkly. They treat ice like iron, forgetting it's a ghost in solid form. You slip away from the conversation and visit the home of another investor, a former naval officer who put part of his pension into the very fleet now being quietly dissolved. His sitting room smells of pipe smoke and dried lemon peel. He's already had the letter. Gone, he says. Just like that. Blocks that never touched a customer's hand. Water on a deck somewhere near Sumatra. You ask if he regrets the investment. No, he replies calmly. Only that we ever believed the ocean would cooperate. He taps the end of his cane against the hearth. Ice moves slowly on land. You can plan for that. But once it's on a ship, it's faith. You're not selling ice. You're selling the hope of arrival. It wasn't always this way. He opens a logbook and shows you earlier records, profits made from earlier voyages, dozens of successful deliveries to tropical ports. The golden years, he calls them, when the trade was still novel, the route still hungry for cold. But now, too many players, too many corners cut, and climate, always unpredictable, always the invisible partner. Before you leave, he hands you a small notebook. He kept notes, the man says, nodding toward a photo on the mantel. His son, a crewman on the same fleet as the widow's husband. Just sketches and temperatures. He used to write about how the hold smelled when the melt began, said it smelled like panic. You turn the pages later that night. Day 12, lost 6 blocks to improper stacking. Day 20, heat above forecast, condensation too heavy. Day 28, captain says it'll be fine, but I can hear the drip. That drip again. The sound that haunts every part of the trade, the slow, rhythmic surrender of ice to air, time and distance. The ice trade didn't fail because of greed or ignorance. It failed because it was built on a material that dies by its own nature. Even success meant loss. Even arrival meant melting. And in the end, no letter ever reported a perfect shipment. You close the notebook and place it beside the fire. A nearby glass of water glistens with condensation, a ring forming on the table below. The ghost of a block long vanished. You return to Boston now, far from the sweating ports and scorched alleys, to the tidy, orderly home of an aging ice merchant who built his fortune on frozen lakes and dusty ledgers. The house sits just outside the city, its shutters neat, its bricks even, its garden blooming in symmetrical beds. But inside, the parlour is dim and cool, curtains drawn to preserve what little chill remains from the night. He pours you a drink, water, with a single cloudy ice cube swirling at the bottom. You both watch it melt. You want to know where it went wrong, he says, setting the pitcher down. That's what they all come asking now, you nod. He gestures toward a stack of account books, spines cracked, margins filled with notes. It was never the harvesting. That part was art. You wait for the lake to thicken just so. You mark your grid. You cut at dawn so the sun doesn't weaken the lines. The men knew the rhythm. The horses knew it too. Ice cutting wasn't the problem. He picks up a ledger and flips through pages filled with looping script and cargo manifests. No, the trouble came later, when men stopped caring how the ice got there, when they just wanted more, cheaper, faster. That's when the sawdust got thinner. That's when they started shipping in crates that hadn't dried properly. That's when ice started arriving cloudy. He pauses, looking at the glass again. You ever see a block of ice split because someone packed it too tight? One crack, and it starts melting from the inside. Nothing to stop it. By the time you reach the port, it's a puddle with a crust. You glance at a painting on the wall, an idealised lake scene, workers in neat rows, horses waiting patiently by sleds. It looks clean, noble, but beneath the paint, you sense the weight of every compromise that came later. He leans back in his chair and tells you about the sawdust. We called it gold dust, he says, not because it was valuable, but because it hid everything. A cracked block, cover it in dust, a melt line forming, dust it deeper. Sometimes we sold nothing more than frozen lies, held together by splinters and hope. He doesn't say this with bitterness, only recognition. You flip through one of the ledgers. Beside a shipment destined for Havana, a faint pencil mark reads, "Repacked. Integrity questionable." Another note by a Madras shipment says, "Left port with full load, arrived with less than half. Blame shifted to deckhands." You ask if customers ever complained. He laughs. Of course. But who could prove anything? Ice is gone before the argument even starts. You walk with him to the back of the house, where an old storage shed still stands. Inside, the walls are lined with faded sacks that once held sawdust. In the corner, a rusted ice hook hangs like a retired sword. A single square of tin still marks where the block used to sit. Every week, he says, we chip a bit off for the house, for the milk, for the gin. He smiles faintly. Sometimes, just to hold it, just to feel something that was here and wouldn't be for long. You step back out into the afternoon sun, and behind you the door creaks shut on a room once filled with cold, now just filled with memory. You walk back toward Boston Harbour, where the story began, not with a grand announcement, but with quiet ambition. The docks are quieter now. The old ice barges, once so central to this city's heartbeat, are fewer each year. Machines hum in the distance, louder than the shouts of dock hands. Somewhere behind a brick warehouse, you hear the hissing breath of a refrigeration compressor. But before you leave, you visit one last house, one far grander than the ice merchant's. A brick mansion perched on Beacon Hill, its windows tall and its drawing rooms flooded with filtered light. The butler greets you with precision, and you're escorted through the halls to a long dining room set with polished silver and bone china. In the corner stands an icebox, modern by any standard. Brass handles, double insulation. The block inside is clean, almost too perfect. Imported, perhaps, or machine-made. The housekeeper explains how they still receive natural ice. For the charm. It's brought in twice a week from a supplier in Maine, shaved, shaped, and slid neatly into the back compartment. She doesn't mention that a mechanical refrigerator hums quietly 2 floors down, powering the wine cellar and cooling the meats. This box is symbolic now, a vestige, and yet the family still insists. It's tradition, she says. The lady of the house likes to tell guests that her ice comes from the same lakes as her great-grandmother's. You smile politely. You've seen the path that ice took to get here. The rivers and roads, the barges and buoys, the cracked crates and unpaid sailors. You wonder what that great-grandmother would think of this polished heirloom, humming with cold made by flame and pressure instead of wind and snow. Later you step outside and pass a grocer unpacking mechanical coolers from a wagon. He waves at you with a grin, holding up a small wrapped unit. Doesn't melt, he says. Not until you say so. There it is, the dream of total control. Cold on command, chill without risk, no sawdust, no guessing, no dripping blocks sweating secrets into the floor. But in another corner of the city, you stumble upon one of the last true ice warehouses. Stone walls, a slanted roof, and an air inside that hits your face like January. The foreman lets you in with a shrug. Not much left to see, he says. We rent space now for specialty orders, restaurants, hotels, a few old families, weddings, if they're rich enough. He pauses. Some just want it for the sound. You look confused. He leads you to the storage room where a man is chipping a block for delivery. With each strike, the ice sings, a deep, hollow chime, like glass caught in a cathedral bell. The foreman smiles. See? That sound. You can't fake it. Machine ice is too dense. This stuff rings. You close your eyes and listen. The echo fills the space around you, eerie and ancient. A song that once echoed in every kitchen, every cart, every cellar and ship. You realize then what made the ice trade so strange, so human. It was built on something vanishing, a product that didn't last, a business that relied on moving faster than time itself. Now, the world no longer waits. It doesn't melt. It hums. But somewhere in the back rooms of Boston, the last echoes of the old trade still ring out, clear, cold, and fading. You wake before dawn to follow the tracks, literal ones, stretching from the icy lakes of New England down toward the booming cities of the mid-Atlantic. These are not passenger lines or scenic routes. These are ice trains, freight wagons groaning under the weight of blocks so carefully packed you'd think they were carrying glass. You're standing in a small town rail yard where a locomotive puffs fog into the crisp morning air. A crew is already at work, hoisting crates, checking fastenings, brushing sawdust into cracks like apothecaries treating a wound. There's urgency in the air. The sun hasn't even breached the trees, and yet time already feels like it's slipping. The foreman waves you over and lifts a tarp. Beneath it, 50 blocks stacked like glistening bricks, separated by thin layers of straw and pine. The corners are chamfered, the surfaces squared. Each one is heavy enough to bruise a foot, light enough for 2 men to wrestle it into place, and all of them destined for people who will never see the lake it came from. You step onto the rail car and feel the faint vibration of the engine waking. The men around you speak in clipped phrases, part code, part ritual. Pack tight but don't press. No contact on corner 3. Check the top melt. This is not mere cargo. This is a race against physics. The whistle blows once, then twice, and with a shudder, you're off. The journey south is a test. The sun climbs higher. The temperature inches up. Each hour is a quiet gamble. How long will the insulation hold? Will the sawdust shift? Did the crates get sealed well back at the ice house? One man passes around a small tin of tobacco and tells you about a shipment that never made it past New Haven. Whole lot turned to soup. Summer train. New guy packed him with hay instead of dust. He spits, shakes his head. Might as well have sent them blocks on fire. He's not exaggerating. Ice loss in transit was one of the biggest threats to the industry. Sometimes as much as 30% of a load would melt before reaching its destination. That's why they sent more than needed. Every journey was built on sacrifice. A little ice must die so the rest can arrive. As you ride farther south, past Hartford and toward New York, the landscape changes. Red brick towns turn to sootier skylines. The railcar grows hotter. You hear soft cracks from inside the cargo, expansion, tension, warning. The men press their palms against the crates and nod silently. Somewhere past Bridgeport you see one of the crew slip a long thermometer into a crate and wait. He pulls it out, scowls. "We'll make it," he mutters, "but just barely." By the time you pull into the receiving station outside Manhattan, the blocks are sweating. Beads of water run like tears along the edges, but most are still solid. The math worked. Just enough coal to survive. Men swarm the train like ants, pulling crates onto wagons and rolling them toward businesses, restaurants, factories. Each delivery marks another quiet victory over entropy. No applause, no celebration, just survival. For now. The foreman claps your shoulder. "We don't just move ice," he says, "we move winter." And you step off the train, your boots crunching on fresh sawdust left behind like breadcrumbs. Later that afternoon, you follow one of those ice wagons into the depths of Manhattan. The city pulses with summer heat. Horses sweat against their harnesses. Shopkeepers throw open their windows. And yet inside certain buildings, behind velvet curtains and marble counters, something astonishing waits. Cold. The wagon stops at a butcher's shop on Mulberry Street. You help the delivery man carry a half-melted block through the alley, past crates of salted pork, and into a cellar where the walls are lined with dripping bricks. This is one of the earliest cold rooms in the city, not a refrigerator. A room made cold by sheer effort. The butcher gives you a nod and a sliver of meat. "This right here," he says, patting the block, "is why I'm not selling spoiled flesh to the Irish." You don't quite know how to respond. Upstairs, customers haggle over chops, never realizing how delicate the balance is beneath their feet. If that ice block had failed to arrive, the entire inventory might have turned by morning. Even a few hours' delay could spell disaster. You continue your journey to an upscale hotel where another delivery arrives at the service entrance. This block is destined not for meat but for elegance. The icebox of a guest suite on the 3rd floor. A footman guides it through narrow corridors, careful not to scratch the wallpaper. In the room, a woman in silks nods approvingly as the box is restocked. "French cheese," she says, not looking up. "And milk from the Catskills. It must be kept at precisely the right chill." You watch as the block is slid into the chamber, the door latched shut. The ice won't last the week, of course. But for now, it creates a pocket of cool luxury in a city baking under July sun. Your final stop is more surprising. A morgue. Here, the ice isn't about comfort or food. It's about stillness, preservation, dignity. The attendant explains that the bodies must be kept cool until arrangements are made. He lifts a cloth, revealing a wooden slab packed with chipped ice. A man lies there, serene in the artificial winter. "You'd be surprised," the attendant murmurs. "Sometimes it's the only piece they get." You leave with a strange heaviness. The same block of ice you realize can touch every corner of life, from banquets to burials. It's both mundane and profound, something to slip into a drink or to cradle the dead. Back on the street you pause at a newsstand. The headlines talk of machines, of experiments with gas compression, of cooling coils and self-contained units. One article shows a drawing of a kitchen without an icebox at all. You fold the paper and tuck it away. Not yet. For now, the city still runs on ice, and the men who ride those rails still chase winter across the seasons, one sweating block at a time. You hear the rumble of another train in the distance. They're already on the way. You arrive just in time to witness a miracle, or rather a marketing stunt disguised as one. It's a sweltering August afternoon in Savannah, Georgia. The air hangs heavy with the scent of magnolia and sweat, and the streets shimmer beneath the sun. A crowd gathers near the harbour, murmuring and fanning themselves with handkerchiefs. They're not here for a speech or a sermon. They're here for a shipment. A tugboat approaches, hauling a barge stacked with crates. On its side, in bold painted letters, are two words that feel almost impossible out here: Boston Ice. You feel the buzz ripple through the crowd. The heat has become so oppressive that the very idea of ice feels like a fantasy, a whispered promise of winter in the middle of summer. Children perch on their fathers' shoulders. Women lift their skirts to catch the sea breeze. The mayor himself is waiting with a silver scoop in hand, and then it begins. One crate is opened ceremoniously. Sawdust spills onto the dock like golden chaff. A gleaming block of ice is pulled out, still solid, still cold, still, miraculously, whole. A cheer erupts. The mayor chips a sliver, drops it into a glass of sweet tea and raises it aloft. Boston winter, he proclaims, delivered right to our lips. You take a sip from your own glass, handed to you by a boy in suspenders. The tea chills instantly, and for a moment, time slows. The sun still blazes, the air still swelters, but something in your bones shifts. You feel the north. This is no accident. Ice entrepreneurs have discovered that publicity is as important as insulation. In cities like Savannah, Charleston, and New Orleans, ice arrivals are orchestrated like parades. Banners wave. Free samples are handed out. Sometimes a shaved ice cart is rolled through the crowd, turning blocks into pastel slush flavoured with syrup and nostalgia. It's not just about cooling drinks, it's about selling a sensation. One local grocer, smelling opportunity, positions himself next to the display with a sign: "Pre-order your ice today, 5 cents a pound, delivery by dawn." Behind the spectacle, logistics creak. Half the shipment is likely half melted. The dock workers wince as they lift dripping crates. But that doesn't matter. The stunt has worked. Word of mouth spreads faster than any advertisement. By nightfall, a dozen families have paid to have their own tiny slice of Boston delivered in sawdust. You find yourself walking past back alleys where men sneak chips of ice into clay jars, past boarding houses where someone holds an ice cube to her cheek and giggles like she's touched a snowflake, past a preacher who calls it God's cool mercy in a wickedly hot land, and all from a block that began its life on a frozen New England pond months and miles away. You realise now, the ice trade isn't just logistics, it's theatre, illusion, promise. A cold trick played on a hot world, and it's working. But not every performance ends with applause. The next morning you ride along with a delivery man navigating Savannah's narrow streets in a cart lined with straw and leaking water. The illusion of endless ice is already cracking. Yesterday's cheers have faded into today's logistics. Tricky addresses, missed houses, blocks chipped down to half their size. You stop first at a grand house near Forsyth Park. The servant who opens the door frowns at the slushy remains in the cart. "It's barely a brick," she mutters. "The master won't like it." She haggles over the price, claiming the weight's off, and finally tosses a few coins with visible irritation. The deliveryman sighs and wipes his brow. "Still better than nothing," he says. The next stop is a tenement in a poorer part of town. There's no livery here, no polished brass handles, just peeling shutters and laundry flapping overhead. The woman who greets you has a baby on her hip and dark circles under her eyes. "I saved a few cents," she says, "just enough for a small block." The man lifts a chunk no bigger than a fist, wraps it in cloth, and hands it over like it's made of gold. She clutches it gratefully and ducks back inside. You pause, listening. Inside, you hear the soft gasp of the baby. Then laughter, a splash, a sigh of relief. In this place, a palm of ice is not a novelty, it's survival. By midday, the cart is nearly empty, and the heat has grown unbearable. The delivery man finally pulls into a shaded alley and rests. You sit beside him as he opens his last ration. A small flask. Not liquor, not tea, cold water. It's melted ice, he explains. Tastes better than anything else in this city. He hands it to you. It's sweet, clean, and, above all, cool. You close your eyes and let it linger on your tongue. He tells you stories then, of children licking icicles like candy, of one bride who insisted her wedding cake be stored with ice, all the way from New York, of a man who kept a sliver of last winter's ice under glass just to remember how it felt, and of failures, entire shipments lost to storms, corrupt agents who sold off the best blocks before they reached their destination, wagons that toppled in the mud. Still, they kept going, because even when the block shrank to puddles, the idea of cold remained strong enough to chase. You walk back through the city as twilight falls. The bars hum with voices, the porches glow with lanterns, and from a kitchen window you hear the soft chink of ice against glass. Just once, just enough. And in that sound you hear everything. The hope, the exhaustion, the absurd brilliance of a trade built on something destined to vanish. Because ice isn't meant to last. But sometimes it stays with you anyway. You head west. Not to Boston or New York this time, but to the dry, dusty frontier where ice isn't just a luxury, it's a miracle. You step off the train in San Francisco in the 1870s, and the moment the air hits your face, you realise the problem. It's not just warm, it's bone dry and relentlessly sun-baked. No frozen lakes, no wintry ponds, and certainly no snowpack cellars in the backyard. Yet somehow there's ice. You walk past saloons with chilled beer, fishmongers displaying glistening catch hauled in from the Pacific, resting on icy beds, and even a boarding house where a woman offers you iced lemonade, the glass beaded with cold sweat like a pearl in her hand. You stare. How? You finally ask. She grins. Alaska, sweetheart. And just like that, you're chasing a new origin. At the harbour, you spot the ships, lumbering vessels packed with insulated holds, arriving every few weeks with their cargo not of gold or goods, but tons of ice hacked from the glaciers of Sitka. The blocks are enormous, some as large as trunks, and stacked like crystal coffins in sawdust and burlap. Men bark orders as they're hoisted onto carts and rolled through the hills of early San Francisco, their paths leaving glistening trails that vanish before your eyes. It's an entirely different operation from the New England trade. Here the routes are longer, the risk higher, and the competition stiffer. For every block that survives the journey, another melts into useless puddles at sea. You hear stories of ships rerouted by storms, of ice arriving fused into giant unusable lumps, of dock workers fighting over deliveries because they were promised too much. But none of it stops the demand. Inside a bustling fish market near Market Street, you see a man carving thin flakes from a glacial block onto oysters. Keeps them alive, he says, voice thick with accent. No ice, no oyster. You want to sell fish in California? You bring winter with you. The idea startles you, transporting winter to a place that's never known it. You picture the effort, the expense, the sheer defiance of it. And yet here it is, in barrels, cellars, hotel kitchens, hiding in plain sight like contraband from another season. What's stranger is how quickly people forget where it comes from. You ask one man, sipping an iced coffee in a cafe near Powell Street, if he knows where the ice came from. He shrugs. I don't know. The store, I guess. And there it is, the ultimate success of the trade. When people stop marvelling and start expecting. When ice becomes invisible, even while it's the most fragile miracle in the room. You run your hand along a melting block, watching the droplets pool. The Pacific glimmers in the distance. Somewhere out there, another ship is hauling its frozen cargo toward this heat-blasted city, and no one's waiting on the dock to cheer anymore. They're just waiting for their drinks to stay cold. By now, you're noticing a pattern. No matter where you go, no matter how far from snow and frost, people have found ways to carve out cold from the edge of the impossible, and nowhere is that more dramatic than in the desert. You leave San Francisco and travel inland. across the golden hills, through parched valleys, until you reach a small outpost outside Tucson. The heat here is so dry it cracks your lips and warps the wooden rails of the depot. Shade is a rumour, and water feels like luxury. Yet as you step inside the local saloon, the barkeep slides you a glass of sarsaparilla over the counter, and in it, a sliver of ice. You blink. You ask again, "Where's this from?" He lifts a shoulder. "Iceman brought it in 2 days ago. Came all the way from Colorado." You laugh, thinking it's a joke. But he doesn't smile. It turns out, in this strange corner of the American frontier, men are hauling blocks of mountain ice hundreds of miles by mule train. Packed in straw, canvas, and hope, the ice journeys through rugged passes, scorched trails, and lawless stretches of wilderness. One wrong move, and the block's gone before it's halfway delivered. You ride along with one of the haulers the next day. His wagon creaks with every turn, and sweat drips from his brow before the sun even peaks. He checks the burlap constantly, adjusting the tarps, touching the blocks with the back of his hand to guess how much time he has left. There are no guarantees out here. Every delivery is a gamble. At one rest stop, he opens a crate to reveal what's left of the top block. Cracked, weeping, already slushy around the edges. "Lost a third on the way," he mutters. "Still enough to make the doctor happy." You ask why a doctor wants it. "Surgery. Keeps the knives clean. Helps numb the pain." He looks at you sideways. When you live out here, cold becomes medicine. It sticks with you, that phrase. Cold as medicine. Because in these far-flung settlements, ice isn't just a luxury anymore. It's survival. It preserves food when there's no cellar. It eases fevers when no nurse is around. It keeps a newborn's milk safe for another day. In one town, you hear of a man who used his last coin to buy ice for his mother's soup, just to keep her cool during a heat wave. She lived another week. He called it his miracle. You pass a tent settlement where one enterprising woman has set up a cool room dug into the hillside, where ice blocks are stacked between stone walls and linen curtains flutter at the entrance. She charges a nickel for 5 minutes inside. You step in, and it's like walking into a cave carved out of January. People sit on wooden benches, eyes closed, hands to their faces, breathing in the brief, delicious cold. No one speaks. There's nothing to say. It's a pause in the heat, a stolen breath of winter. And as you leave, you realize you're witnessing a world where people will move heaven and earth just to feel a breeze. Back in the east, the world is shifting. The old ice barons who once ruled the trade with frozen ponds and daring shipments are starting to feel something new, something mechanical humming quietly beneath the surface. You hear whispers of machines that can make ice without a winter. No lakes, no sawdust, no sailing halfway across the globe. At first, the idea feels absurd. How can you create cold out of thin air? But then you walk into a meatpacking plant in Chicago, and you see it. A metal box, squat and sweating. Tubes winding like intestines. A churning sound that seems to echo from another dimension. A man in oil-stained overalls watches dials and cranks a lever, and out slides a block of ice, as clean and perfect as if it had been pulled from the heart of a lake. "You're making ice?" you ask, blinking. He nods. 10 tons a day, and that's just one machine. You run your fingers along the fresh surface. It's cold, truly cold. Colder than the blocks you saw melting in Georgia, or the ones dragged through the Arizona dust. There's no straw clinging to it, no speck of mud, just clean, solid, humming cold. The man explains how it works, though most of it washes over you like steam. Compression, ammonia coils, evaporative cooling. You nod, pretending to understand. What matters is the outcome. Ice. On demand. And suddenly, it's not something seasonal anymore. It's no longer tied to the whims of weather or the strength of mules or the timing of ships. It's here, whenever you want it. You follow one of the blocks as it's loaded onto a cart and wheeled into the city. It disappears into a restaurant's back door. Another is hauled into a hospital. Another into a bar. It's seamless, unannounced. The ice just arrives. You notice the faces of the delivery boys. They're not sweating. They're not scowling. They're not guarding precious cargo like it's made of diamonds. This is routine now. The miracle has become mundane. And the old ice houses, they're fading. You ride past one on the edge of town, a looming wooden relic, its paint peeling, its roof slumping inward. A few boys throw stones at the side, laughing as it echoes. No one guards it anymore. No one fears its theft. There's no reason to. Later, in a hotel lounge, you overhear a man from Boston complain. "We used to sell to half the South. Now they're all making their own," he spits into his glass. "Where's the dignity in that?" But even he knows, this change isn't just coming, it's already here. You walk the streets that evening, watching as ice glides from machine to cart to table with no ceremony. You remember the ice auctions, the shipwrecks, the desert miracles, and now in a single whirring metal box, all of that has been replaced. The future has a faint smell of ammonia and oil, and the past is melting, one block at a time. You linger in the twilight of the trade, watching it quietly collapse beneath its own weight. Not with a bang, but a slow drip. The men who once carved fortunes from frozen ponds now hold crumpled contracts in trembling hands. One retired merchant sits on a Boston dock with his cane staring out at an empty harbour. "Used to be 20 schooners here by this hour," he mutters, "all loaded with ice. Now, just gulls and ghosts." His son runs a small bottling plant now, powered by one of those new ammonia coils. No sense chasing rivers, the son tells you. The cold comes to us now. You can't help but feel a pang. After everything, the night harvesting, the daring shipments, the bribes at customs, the elaborate sawdust insulation tricks, it all ends like this, with the flick of a switch. But change has no sentiment. You walk into a London hotel and find a hidden chamber behind the scullery, humming with frost. They call it a cold room now. No more ice boxes with daily deliveries. Just walls lined with cool metal, humming night and day, keeping cream fresh and meat safe. One maid tells you she hasn't seen the iceman in weeks. "Don't miss him," she says with a grin. "He always tracked mud into the hallway." And she's not the only one adjusting. In Paris, a chef brags about his machine-made ice being clearer, colder and better for sorbet. In Sydney, a pharmacist shows you chilled medicine cabinets that keep vials stable without needing a daily top-up of slush. The world is adapting, fast, as if it had been waiting all along. But then, somewhere in Vermont, you find an old general store that still gets its ice from a nearby lake. The owner, a weathered man with a beard like moss, lugs out a cube so thick it sings when you knock it. "Still believe in seasons," he says, placing it in a wooden chest. "Makes you respect time. Machines don't teach that." He pours you a lemonade, icy and sharp. For a moment you taste everything that came before: Norwegian fjords, tropical warehouses, the crack of a frozen axe in the pre-dawn dark. The moment passes. Later, in New York, you read the obituary of a man who once organised the first transatlantic shipment of ice. The paper calls him a pioneer of cold, though his name has already begun to fade. His legacy, buried under a new tide of steel and science. You pass by one of the last surviving ice houses being torn down. Kids peek inside before the wrecking ball swings, hoping to see something mysterious. One boy shouts, "It smells like winter in there." You smile, because he's right. For a century, these places bottled winter. They caught fleeting frost and held it in wooden ribs. They bridged continents with silence and steam, and offered summer its first breath of relief. And now, that breath comes from a wire, a motor, a hum in the wall. You stand still and listen. Somewhere deep behind the city noise you hear that hum. It's soft, it's steady, it's forever. You wake before sunrise in a quiet boarding house just outside Philadelphia. The air is still, thick with summer, and already you can feel the heaviness of the day ahead. But your room is cool, not from a block of melting lake ice nestled in a metal box, but from something unseen. A quiet hum in the wall, a coldness that doesn't sweat, doesn't drip, doesn't fade. Downstairs, the landlady pours you a cup of tea and gestures toward the small humming unit by the pantry. That thing's a miracle, she says. Never have to chase the iceman again. You nod. But as you sip, you can't help thinking about all the people who once did. The farmers who watched for the first thin glaze across their ponds. The cutters who rose before dawn, trusting the ice beneath their feet not to crack. The horses that hauled ton after ton to creaking storage barns. And the ships. Oh, the ships. You remember standing on the deck of one, your boots slick with frost, as men swung giant tongs and wedged blocks into tight sawdust-lined stacks. The creak of timber, the roll of the Atlantic, and the strange smell of cold and salt and wood all mingling in the hold. That wasn't just cargo. That was winter, captured, wrapped, and sent thousands of miles to places that had never known it. Now, you step into a grocer's shop and see a refrigerator humming in the corner. You open the door and feel the cold hit your skin like a soft slap. Inside, glass bottles of milk glisten. Butter rests unbothered. Chopped greens look as fresh as the day they were picked. The storekeeper notices you staring. Used to pay the ice boy every other morning, he says. Now I just pay the bill once a month, don't miss the mess. But something inside you does. You walk the streets, noticing how quiet it all is now. The chaos is gone. No more dripping carts, no more puddles by the door, no more panicked cries of "shut the lid, quick!" when the ice started to slide. The cold is everywhere now, but it's invisible. It hums behind the walls, behind the market stalls, behind the barroom doors. In one alley you spot the remnants of an old wooden sign. Ice sold here. Faded. Forgotten. It strikes you then how this story isn't just about ice. It's about effort, about labour, about entire worlds built around the impossible idea of keeping things cold in a hot world. You stop by a museum that's just opened a new exhibit. Before the fridge, a century of ice. There, behind glass, sits a rusted pair of iron tongs, a wooden-handled saw, a faded shipping invoice from Havana. Kids pass by the display with mild curiosity. One asks, why didn't they just plug it in? You chuckle softly, because they couldn't. Because before the cold came from a switch, it came from men who gambled with nature, who watched the weather like a banker watches the market, who sweated for every degree below freezing. And as the exhibit loops a grainy film reel of ice blocks sliding down ramps into wagons, you realise something else. None of it was wasted. You leave the museum just as dusk settles, the summer sky stained with lavender and bronze. There's something poetic about the evening air. Thick, yes, but somehow gentler now that you've spent the day walking through memories of frost. You stroll past the river where, once upon a time, teams would race to cut the ice before it grew too thick or too thin. The banks are calm tonight. Not a single cart, not a horse's hoof, not even a scrap of sawdust remains. Just the quiet trickle of water and a warm breeze curling past your sleeves. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The scrape of the handsaw, the echo of shouted measurements, the grunt of shoulders heaving ice into a waiting sleigh. All of it packed into the bones of the place, if not the surface. At the corner, you pass an old ice house now turned into a trendy cafe. The beams are still there, thick, pine, stained with time. But instead of sawdust, the floors are polished. Instead of ice, there's espresso. A sign on the wall reads, "Chill here since 1856. You chuckle. At least someone remembers. You sit at a table outside with a cold drink that came from a modern freezer. It's crystalline, flawless, but somehow a little too perfect. The old ice had character. It cracked, it sweat, it groaned like it was alive. This is silence in a glass. You think back to the Norwegian mountains and the great ships bound for India, to the engineers sketching blueprints for ammonia machines in smoky basements, to the last block of natural ice carried by hand into a kitchen on a hot day. Every one of those moments built this world of invisible cold. You realise now, it wasn't the ice itself that mattered. It was the sheer human will behind it. The will to carve winter from nature's grip, to sail it across oceans, to preserve sweetness in the heat, to master time by mastering temperature. And even if today's cold hums quietly behind our walls, untouched by saw or sleigh or season, the spirit of the trade survives in every chilled lemon slice, in every quiet humming fridge, in every ice cube that clinks into a glass. You look up at the stars, your glass beading with condensation, and whisper a silent thank you to the men who once carved glaciers with their bare hands. You owe more to them than you think. And now, as the night deepens around you, let your breath settle. The chill of the story still lingers, like the last breeze slipping from an old icehouse door. You've travelled through frozen lakes and thunderous docks, creaking wagons and humming machines. You've followed the trail of ice, not just across continents, but across time. The Victorian world tried to harness winter, to bottle up a season and make it serve their needs. And somehow they did, through sweat, through ingenuity, through sheer stubbornness. And though the ice melted, the legacy never did. So now, in your own quiet room, with the soft hum of modern comfort around you, give yourself permission to rest. You don't have to lift tongs or watch the skies. You don't have to measure the thickness of pond ice or race to load a barge. Tonight, the cold will come to you, gentle, effortless, unseen. Let your hands go still. Let your thoughts drift back to the Norway lakes, the dusty roads of Georgia, the frost-covered ship decks in Bombay. Let the memory of them fade slowly like breath on a window pane, and as the last ice melts in the glass beside your bed, close your eyes. The world is quiet, the cold is kind, and you are home.